Well, good morning. My name is Ken Nash. I'm so glad you're here at Cornerstone today. And those of you tuning in online, thank you for tuning in today. We have a lot to dive into. I really want to start with this illustration around, do you ever just watch a movie and do you ever just love it when you clearly know who the bad guy is? Like, I love it. You can relax a little bit. I don't need more chaos in my life. Like, for example, the Wizard of Oz is really clear. You know, it's clearly Dorothy and the Wicked Witch. Like, you know the bad person. You can hear literally the piano playing dark music whenever they enter into the scene. Or Batman and Joker, you know who the bad guy is. It's really clear. Or maybe Home Alone with Kevin and you've got the Wet Bandits, you know. They're clearly the bad people. But here's where it gets tricky. It's not always that clean. In fact, in our culture, it's even getting messier. Now on Broadway, you've got Wicked, where you actually learn about the backstory of the Wicked Witch, and you start to feel sympathy. And you feel kind of the same thing with Joker. You hear the backstory of the Joker, and you're like, oh, they're not as bad as I thought. This is terrible. And then Home Alone ended up being Macaulay Culkin, who was the bad guy in real life at times for an early season. Like, you never know who the bad guy is. And that's true. I mean, it's not that clean. And you think about that. Today we're going to be looking at Mark chapter 7, and we're going to look at the villain of the story. The villain is really clear, so it seems. In fact, in Mark chapter 3, when we were reading that, we learned about the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, and the Herodians. And so we learned about these people that came against Jesus. Well, today in chapter 7, if you're a guest with us, every week we're going through the book of Mark, and we're going one chapter at a time. So we preach on it, and then we read that chapter throughout the week. So this week, you're going to read about the villain of the story. But the villain isn't always as clean of just being clearly the bad guy as we think. In fact, when you get groups of people together, there's always going to be tension of even sometimes the people that you think are good have motives that are filled with greed or selfishness, and it's a lot more complex than that. I wish it was clean, but it's not. Because even the Pharisees, as we study them today, you think of them as the villain. It's easy to look at the villains and say, well, clearly they were so bad pushing against Jesus. But at the heart of the Pharisees, they just asked one question. How do we do what is good? How do we please God? At the core, all they were trying to do was please God. How can that be bad? That's where it gets complex. Well, today you may be asking that question. What makes me a good person? I mean, how do I know that I'm doing good? How do I know if I'm pleasing God? The answer we're going to find as we turn to Mark chapter 7 may surprise you. In fact, I'm calling in my mind this sermon a dangerous sermon because the answer is actually quite dangerous. I'll show you what I mean by that as we go, but if you would join with me, I want to turn to chapter 7 of Mark. We're going to start right at verse 1. As you turn there, go to your Bible app. It'll be on the screen as well. But chapter 6, we saw last week, was very a busy moment in the ministry of Jesus. I mean, he just sent his disciples out in groups of 2 throughout the towns. They fed 5,000. He calmed a storm. He walked on water. Like, it was a busy, busy moment. Chapter 7 is just an aggressive confrontation from the villain. And it starts right away in verse 1. So as we turn the page to chapter 7, listen to this. The Pharisees and some of the teachers of the law who had come from Jerusalem gathered around Jesus and saw some of his disciples eating food with hands that were defiled, that is, unwashed. Just like when your mom yelled at you, you got to wash your hands. It's the exact same thing. They're defiled. They're dirty. Mark goes on. The Pharisees and all the Jews do not eat unless they give their hands a ceremonial washing, holding to the tradition of the elders. When they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. And they observe many other traditions, such as the washing of cups, pitchers, and kettles. Before I go any further, as you've studied Mark, you'll notice there's very few times where Mark puts his opinion or commentary. Well, here's one of them, and we see here he's really kind of calling out. These guys are trying to be holy, they're trying to be good, but they're like getting more extreme. You don't just wash hands, you wash your pots and pans as well. So it goes on, the very next verse. So the Pharisees and the teachers of the law asked Jesus, why don't your disciples live according to the tradition of the elders, instead of eating their food with defiled hands? So the question is really obvious. Why don't you follow the law, Jesus? Why aren't your disciples doing it? But if you notice the word that they used, they don't say, Jesus, why aren't your disciples following the scriptures? What word did they use? Jesus, why don't they follow the traditions of man? Now, it's easy, again, to look at the Pharisees and say they're clearly villains. They come against Jesus, and that is wrong and bad. But again, their heart was good, and they were trying to just do what they thought would please God. But they were loaded with tradition. So are we. In fact, it may be obvious to you that I'm breaking a tradition at Cornerstone right now as we speak. I am not wearing the traditional Cornerstone garb. I'm wearing what would be maybe traditional church service kind of robe. So actually, what I should probably do is actually continue to wear the traditional Cornerstone garb, which is always the untucked shirt. That's what makes this a Cornerstone sermon. This is what makes it a Cornerstone endorsed message. Why? Well, because I have the Cornerstone garb. I don't tuck my shirt. That's what we do. That's the tradition of Cornerstone. And I've got the bracelet that we have, the HEIS, which stands for one. So we've got that, and I've got my Fitbit to show that I'm trying to be healthy. But everybody knows it's Super Bowl Sunday. I'm not going to download this thing for sure today. It's not a healthy day at all, right? And so you've got the Cornerstone traditions. Right now, some of you are like, oh, he had so much more authority when he had this on. Now he just looks like a punk. What is he doing, And well, that's because those are the traditions of Cornerstone. Some of you haven't heard a word I said until this point, and now you're like, okay, now that makes sense. He was just making a point about tradition. Yeah, we are very traditional people. We have another tradition that we broke today. We sang just one song at the beginning. How dare we? And many of you don't even come in for the first song. And so you walked in and you're like, they didn't even sing today. What is wrong with Cornerstone? Well, you missed the one song. So we thought today, let's put our 3 songs, because our tradition, 3 songs, a sermon, and a closing song. That is how we are holy. That is how we are righteous. It makes sense, right? That's our tradition. And so today we messed that up, and you're kind of like, this doesn't feel holy. Well, yeah, you missed the opening song maybe, and the only song. So there's all these traditions that we have. It's fascinating to me as I look at history. Many of you don't know this, but feel free to, I know you fact check me all the time, so feel free to fact check me on this one. The history of music in church has been messy throughout the years. And when we introduced the organ, many of you grew up hearing the organ in church. I did as well. And when you hear the organ in church, you think that's traditional, holy music. Do you realize when we introduced the organ to church, people were furious because the organ was what was played in the bars along with pianos. And literally people thought, how can you bring that devil's music into the church? And so there was all this grumpiness. But then enough time passed and generations went by. We've always done it that way because that is what tradition does. We are no different from the Pharisees in many ways. We have these things that we say, do not mess with this. If I were to start reading from the King James Version of the Bible, you'd be like, I don't understand a word he's saying, because our tradition is more of a contemporary NIV or NLT kind of translation. And so you say, that didn't even make sense today, because our tradition is that we speak in a contemporary language. That makes us feel holy. Again, how are we any different in some ways from the very Pharisees that are struggling with what Jesus says here. Because I would make the argument that we love tradition as much as the Pharisees did in these verses. Let's keep going. I'll start it and keep going at verse 6. So they've asked the question, Jesus, why are your disciples not washing their hands? You know, the tradition of the past. And so there's all of this tension here, and Jesus now replies. Jesus replied, Isaiah was right. He's talking about the Old Testament, or the only Bible, the Hebrew scriptures that they had. Isaiah was a prophet. Isaiah was right when he prophesied about you hypocrites. So Jesus is angry because they're bringing all of this tradition against him, and he's saying, this isn't the law of God. You're following tradition. He calls them you hypocrites, and he goes on, as it is written, these people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They worship me in vain. Their teachings are merely human rules. You've made up all these rules. Do you hear the tension? You have let go of the commands of God and are holding on to human traditions. And Jesus continued, and you have a fine way of setting aside the commands of God in order to observe your own traditions. Tell me how you really feel, Jesus. Like, he is loaded with this. And his tension I'm sensing here is not that they are following rules. His tension is that they are following man-made rules and ignoring the heart of God in God's law, because they've really added rules. God said, ceremonially wash your hands, and then they said, well, if God's happy with hands, he must be happy with your pots and pans as well. And so there's all this tension going on. In fact, the two verses that he uses in here, notice again, they come from Isaiah 29. If this week when you're reading Mark chapter 7, you may want to go back and see this Isaiah 29 that Jesus quotes. These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. What Jesus is calling out here is really clear: hypocrisy. In fact, if you were, another thing that you could do some research on, if you were to research why unbelievers are repulsed sometimes by Christians, the number one answer frequently found is hypocrisy. They hear us talk this way, but then behave this way, as if we're saying, do as I say, don't do as I do. And so Jesus is calling out our hypocrisy. You've got all these man-made traditions, but your heart is far from loving God. You're doing it to look the part. And so he's furious. And then Jesus calls out from Isaiah again, a really tough one. They worship me in vain. What Jesus is saying there is, if we are just going through rituals, going through man-made traditions, and our hearts aren't transformed, he's literally saying we are wasting our time. Why do we gather every week? It's a waste of time if you're literally just doing it out of human tradition. I mean, this is a Clash of the Titans moment. But, you know, as I think about these Pharisees, and it's easy for me to put them in a category, Pharisees are bad, but they're really not. They're just trying to do good. They may be off in how they live out that goodness, but they're just trying to do good. And I want to kind of go a little bit further thinking about this. Like, in 2023, how are we much different from the Pharisees? When we are losing ground in Christianity throughout America, I'm scared to say this, but I'm sensing that we are becoming, just like Europe that was for many years, a post-Christian society. And I would dare say it doesn't come from a lot of their anger at Jesus. I think some of their anger comes because of us, our hypocrisy. We say one thing, we do another thing, and so you've got really all of this tension going on between our rules that we put on society, and we put our moral standards that God puts on us, and we say, well, then society needs to follow our standards as well. When in fact, God said, I'm never expecting the world that doesn't follow me to follow my rules. I give rules for my children. And we take these and we put them on society, and we do it with a lack of love. And so the world looks at us and they say, you guys are filled with hypocrisy anyway. You tell us to do this, but you behave just as badly as we do. So I'm embarrassed by Christianity sometimes. And so we have this spirit of we judge others and we put this condemnation on others. How, again, are we any different from the Pharisees? Well, Jesus is pretty upset with man-made human rules here. He's yelling loudly at them. And then he goes on and gets even more personal for us today. Again, Jesus called the crowd to him and said, "Listen to me, everyone, and understand this. Nothing outside a person can defile them by going into them. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them." This is quite confusing. Wait a minute. COVID, we know germs going in defile you, right? Germs, you ceremonially wash your hands. God was trying to help us be clean from germs. And Jesus is saying, no, it's not what goes into your body that really defiles you. It's not. What are you talking about, Jesus? He goes on. After he left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples asked him about this parable. Jesus' response is quite funny. He says, "Are you so dull?" I dare you use that at work tomorrow. "Are you so dull?" It's a great response. I just love it. "Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? For it doesn't go into their body, but into their stomach. And then it just goes out of your body." In saying this, Jesus declared all foods clean. This is nuclear. What we just read is nuclear. It is a dramatic statement that Jesus just made. Let me put it into context. So the Pharisees that were listening, and now in this case, the disciples listening deeper, getting a private time with him, are saying, wait a minute, Jesus, Leviticus chapter 11 has all of the rules for ceremonially being clean and all the foods that we are to eat and not eat. Don't eat pig. You can eat these kinds of animals. Don't do this. Make sure that you wash for this. What they didn't know when Leviticus was being written and the law was being established, they didn't understand germs. They didn't understand what meats are actually not toxic for your body. And so God was establishing a pattern by which he wanted to make people healthy. But they've made it so about the rules that they've missed the heart of God. And so now Jesus comes in, and imagine how dramatic this must have been for them. Jesus is literally saying, everything you've learned about the law in Leviticus, ignore that. What? He's literally throwing out some scripture, and that panics me. And that would certainly panic the Pharisees. It would panic the disciples. Who are we following here? Let me come up with an equivalent for us today. That would be the equivalent of Jesus coming today, physically standing on the stage and saying, Cornerstone, I've looked around how you worship, and I need to tell you, this is not good. In fact, from this day henceforth, stop gathering together. Sell the building. I'm going to talk to you privately at your house one-on-one because I'm going to leave the 99 and chase after the one. We would say, time out. Scripture tells us we are not to neglect meeting together. Jesus, those are your scriptures. You're telling us to not gather? What are you saying? Or that would be like Jesus saying, I want you to stop praying. I have another way to connect with you. I'm going to reveal it a little bit later, but right now, stop praying. We would say, are you kidding me? The scriptures are loaded with praying. Jesus, what are you telling us to do? Or imagine if he said, no more singing, Stop singing. And we're like, again, there's an entire book of the Bible, Psalms, that are songs sung to you. You tell us to gather and sing. Now you're telling us, stop that? You know what we would do? We would say, false prophet, that is not Jesus. Get him out of here. Every one of us would say that. Why? Because we know what the scriptures say. We know what God is telling us to do. The interesting thing is that what the disciples, but especially what the Pharisees were missing, is that they were putting traditions over God's law. They were missing the heart of God, and they were just loving their own rules. And Jesus was saying, forget it all then. And what they also didn't realize was Jesus was the only one who has the right to change the rules, if you will. And they are furious, rightly so. It would be so jarring to us. But Jesus was so upset with their putting law over the heart of God. The law was established to help us love God more, and love was gone. They were all about rules over relationship, and Jesus was saying, forget that, crush it. That's how much Jesus is trying to get us to understand a deeper thing of what's going on within us. I mean, this is dramatic. He's saying, you are trusting in the law, not trusting in me. Now Jesus gets really serious. He goes on. This is now we're on verse 20. Jesus went on. What comes out of a person is what defiles them. For it is from within, out of a person's heart, that evil thoughts come. Isn't that interesting? Your heart thinks in this moment. Your evil thoughts come from your heart. He goes on to list them: sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, greed, malice, deceit, lewdness, envy, slander, arrogance, foolishness. All these things come from inside a person. That is what defiles a person, not all of the man-made rules. What defiles a person is what comes from the heart Jesus is laying out. See, what Jesus is laying out here for us is he's helping us to realize this is the core of what God's desire was for us in the scriptures from the beginning. So he lays out these rules. He gives some obvious ones. I mean, adultery, murder, all this theft, like those are clearly bad in any culture. But here's where it gets confusing. Then he calls out things that, remember what I said in the beginning? This is a dangerous sermon. He gets into the heart, and he kind of calls out things that are very hard to pinpoint. He mentions greed. How do you know if a person is greedy? Well, you could say they have a lot of stuff. Well, in my years of ministry, I've seen a lot of people with a lot of stuff who actually give away more than they have. They just happen to have a lot. So just because they have a lot doesn't mean they're greedy. You don't really know if a person is greedy because it's a part of the heart. You don't know their motive. He talks about envy. How do you know if somebody is envious? I mean, you go on social media and it's easy to kind of see everybody plastered with all their beautiful, images that look good and stuff. And you can almost guess if somebody's jealous. You can guess by what they say because it comes from them. But with envy, you really don't truly know if somebody is envious or not. Sexual impurity. I mean, sexual impurity, I guess you can call out adultery. You can say, hey, you guys are doing something you shouldn't be doing. But sexual impurity can be a part of the heart as well. You don't know if somebody's lusting or not. He goes on to say deceit. Do you realize when you lie to somebody, you're actually stealing trust? You're a thief. But how do you know if somebody's lying if you can cover it up? And so we become very good at hiding what's going on within the heart. See why I'm saying this is dangerous? Jesus is getting to the core of our motive. He says other things like slander. I mean, I guess you can tell if somebody's slandering somebody, but you don't necessarily know if they're actually putting somebody down or trying to help the circumstance. Like, only you know what's going on within you. And think about slander from this angle. When you slander another person, you're actually murdering their reputation. There's all sorts of terrible societal issues that happen from within. He says arrogance. He goes on and on. I mean, arrogance. Have you ever thought, my way is right? Like, every one of us are guilty of that. If you've ever thought about something that is your strong opinion, my way is better than your way. There's a spirit of arrogance in there, and oftentimes we can carry this pride that literally makes us look down on other people. But again, only you know. Let's go a little bit more personal in this from a spiritual standpoint. In gathering together in church, we have a lot of traditions. We've got a lot of rules, if you will. To be a good Christian, you have to pray. Well, how do you know what's going on in the heart of somebody when they are praying? This is quite complicated. The prayer may be very, very, very selfish. You may be praying simply because I only care about me. Oh, I'll say all the right things to look the part of a good prayer warrior, but if I saw somebody over here praying and spending a lot of time quietly with God, I genuinely don't know what the motive is in their heart at that moment. It could be very selfish. Fasting, when somebody says, hey, I'm fasting. Like, as a church for years, we were doing Daniel fast. And I remember the first couple of years that we were doing it, man, revivals were happening, wonderful things. But as we got into year 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years into it, we started hearing people talk about, well, I'm eating a bunch of food because I'm about to lose a bunch of weight. And fasting started to become like the kickoff to the new year of making yourself healthy again physically. And we weren't even in some ways talking about the spiritual discipline of connecting intimately with God when you're denying yourself certain foods. And so we took that tradition away because it got off target from what it was intended to be from the beginning, this real intimate sacrifice to Jesus. So there was, again, motives can get messed up sometimes, and only you know if your desire to fast is to connect with God or if it's just the latest fad to do intermittent fasting. You know, we can go on and on. Serving. How do I know that your serving is truly for other people? Because let's be honest, serving makes us feel good. What I love about Cornerstone is that hundreds of us serve. Like, I love the engagement of serving. But what's tricky is you don't know my heart when I serve, and I don't know yours. It may be just because you love the feeling that you get for helping other people. And so in some ways, it's just a very selfish motive. It may be literally to look good. Or giving, do you give to just save on taxes? Or do you give out of guilt? This is a guilt offering, God? Or do you really give because there's joy in your heart? Or attending church or coming online and talking about coming to church. Like, I don't know if your motive is to network with people for your business. I don't know if your motive is to just look good because that's in West Michigan. That's what we do. Only you know. Yuck. That is a tough sermon to process. That's a tough thought to process. How do you know when we are just being Pharisees or not? The Pharisees at least had the courage to tell Jesus, we have rules and we're doing it this way. We don't care. There was a real honest debate going on here, and Jesus was calling us out. He's saying, only you know the motive of your heart. Why do we do what we do? Whew. Really, it all boils down to one question. How do I know if I'm good? I mean, the reason we do all of these things religiously is to connect with God because we just want to do good. Well, let me ask you the question. What makes you good? Is it all the things you obey and all of the behavior of your life? Because today, when we read Mark chapter 7 this week, we see Jesus is saying, I see what's going on in your heart. Because the real motive of your heart is revealed in your actions. It starts here. It doesn't start externally looking the part. We can have all the robe-looking Christianese all around us. We can say all the right things, but Jesus is calling our bluff and saying, I see what's going on in your heart. Oh dear. So let me ask you again, what makes you good? When I finally got the answer to this question, my life changed. Do you know what makes you good? It's nothing that you do. It's who you know. You see, when Jesus enters your heart, he is the one who makes us good. And until you understand what that means, you're going to struggle to put on a show and pretend your way into a good-looking Christian. Here's what I mean. I want to read to you from 2 Corinthians. The Apostle Paul actually, who wrote these words in 2 Corinthians, this is verse 5:21. You can write it down, look at it. I'll put it on the screen here. But the Apostle Paul was just a follower of Jesus, and he said this, why do I do what I do? I try to do good, and I don't do it, and I don't know why I do it so bad. And then another day, he wrote these words. So good. He says this, God made him who had no sin to become sin for us, so that in him we might become the righteousness of God. Do you realize when you follow Jesus with your life, he enters your heart, he enters your life, he covers you, and his death on the cross actually covers your sin and my sin. So the Father looks at us, guess what he sees? He sees Jesus. Guess what that shows God? We are good. What Mark actually shows us in the beginning in chapter 1 is this whole idea of the Holy Spirit comes into the world and literally is into Jesus, and then Jesus is modeling for us. We are going to be covered with the righteousness, like we are covered with a blanket of righteousness. It's not about what you do. It's about who you know. And when Jesus enters your heart and your life, he covers you and he makes you good. It bugs me when I hear Christians say, I'm just a sinner. You're not a sinner. Your identity has changed. When you follow Christ, you become a saint. I know that's hard. My wife is a former Catholic, and you hear saints, and no, you got to do 3 miracles, and you got to do all this to be a saint. The Bible actually says to be a saint is to follow Jesus. He covers you. He makes you perfect, who occasionally commits sin. And then we repent of that. You see, that's what Jesus is getting at here. It's about the intimacy of knowing God. He enters into your life and he transforms you. So right now you may be asking the question, how do we get that? Well, it comes down to this. A little while ago I put this in here, and it's beautiful. It's going to be wonderful tea, right? Why? Because it's been steeping. Let me take another tea bag. Let me put this tea bag in here. What do you think I'm going to taste when I drink this right now? Water. Why are you so dull? Because it hasn't been steeping. What Jesus was getting at with the disciples was he wanted them to steep, to spend time with him. You see, when you spend time with Jesus, wonderful. You take on the flavor of Christ. You take on the deep rootedness. He gets into your soul and he changes you from within. He changes your motive. He changes your heart. So right now I'm willing to bet you say, okay, Ken, tell me, what am I supposed to do to steep in Christ so that he can transform me from within so I live a good life? How do you do that? Well, my answer, again, a dangerous sermon, is something I've wanted to say for 27 years of preaching. The answer is this. How do you steep in Jesus? You figure it out. Oh, that feels good to say. Only you know. Only you know when you feel and experience and know Jesus. Only you know when you feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit. For me, it may be one day when I'm running along and I literally just get filled. There are times I'm worshiping when I'm out exercising. That may not be for you. For me, it's times when I'm in a Bible study debating theology and I just feel like I want to cry because I'm so filled with the Spirit and I get convicted of sin and I repent of that sin. That may not be you. For you, it may be in nature. It may be in these times when we sing. It may be times when you're studying. It may be times when you're literally just writing in journal. I mean, only you know. So you figure it out. But don't stop steeping. That's what Jesus is getting at. He's saying the disciples or the Pharisees were just trying to make their life look this part. I'm trying to help you realize that I'm your righteousness. I'm who makes you good. I'm who heals you. So we're going to spend some time right now just steeping. And my prayer is if you feel like you felt distant from God or you feel like you've been faking it, you feel like a hypocrite right now, that stops here and now because you can steep in Christ. And as you just breathe in and say, Lord, just forgive me. I want to give you three statements up on the screen, and we'll just have a moment of silence, and I'll have the band come out, and then we'll sing our traditional 3 songs. And I don't want you running out of here. I know a lot of you have a tradition as well. The last song, you put your coat on and leave. I know that tradition. I've seen it happen. You guys do that. Let's just soak. Those hot dogs will wait for the game or the pizza will wait. It's still not for a few hours, right? Let's just be still and soak in Christ. And these 3 things, first, this will help guide you. Maybe one of you may just want to hear this. Jesus, here I am. I just need to see you. Have mercy on me, Jesus. Maybe as you have some time singing these songs and you're just still before God, soaking in this time that we have together and the closing of our time together, I pray that maybe you just feel convicted of sin and just say, Lord, forgive me. Forgive me. Guess what? He makes you good. He cleanses you from within. That's what Mark 7 is all about. Or maybe right now you just need to pray, God, Jesus, I just rest in you. I'm tired, and I just need to just feel your peace because I'm exhausted. Lord, as we just come before you right now, I pray that we steep in you, that we soak in you. Cleanse us from within. Make us good and holy because of your righteousness. And as we have time of singing here in just a moment, I pray, God, that you just fill us to overflowing. May we just sing out. Maybe some of us just kneel before you. Maybe we just dance before you, just feel freedom before you. God, help us just to walk in your amazing grace. I thank you for the gift of this moment. I thank you for the teaching of Mark chapter 7. And I pray that there is just a sense of cleansing from within that only comes from you. Let's just be still and soak, and then we can sing.